Hello, everyone. How's it going? Did anybody do anything exciting today? Anybody have a magnificent Monday? Yeah. Oh, happy birthday. Awesome. Ate a lot. Okay. I've been craving cake lately. I really think I'm going to find myself a cake. Look at that. Look at our community. Happy birthday. Tigist, is that how you say your name? Please forgive me. Can you give me, if that's not right, can you give me a phonetic pronunciation? Sandra, were you helping me? I don't know. Like Tig, is that what is a hard G and not a soft G? Is that Tigist? Is that better? Okay, there we go. Okay. Great. All right. Well, now I can remember that because I see you all the time, and I'm like, God, please don't butcher anybody's name. I have a pretty easy name, but people still don't always get it right. I don't understand. Candace. Anyway. All right. Well, it's 8 o'clock and happy birthday and hello, everyone. And I see that most of you are regulars, and so you're ready to continue our work from yesterday. So I'm going to dive right in there. As always, here's our schedule, which you probably have memorized if you are a regular attendee of any other stream. And this is our last stream before we find out what the exam looks like. So this upcoming slide might not be right, but we'll see. As of right now, we're going to have poetry, form, and function next week with Laura Walton, and then come back to me. And I think that April 13th commentary and sophistication is probably going to be applicable to anything. So that'll probably be there. But either the 6th or the 20th won't matter because one's about literary argument, one's about poetry. But we'll just see. But again, we'll be here for the rest of April. I'm not sure there's a stream on the 27th, but I'm sure we'll get something going depending on where we are and what we know at that point. As always, if you're not following Fiveable, what are you doing? It's just a great idea to follow right now with constantly things are coming out and we're getting more information and, you know, all those things. So you can see that on our Twitter, especially all the announcements, you might get emails. So I'm so excited that we've had such great attendance in the last few weeks, and we're really like, we're a little lit community. We're a lit community. I can't make that joke enough, and my students never appreciated it. But yeah, we're a lit community. So tonight, thank you, Tace. So tonight we're going to review thesis just a little bit from last week and the intro formula, because we didn't get that far because we talked about the exam a lot last week, which is fine. And then we're going to go forward with that same defeat poem from last week and see if we can get some theses and introduction, and then go into evidence and commentary. So I'm hoping that we all are able to get the better part of a paragraph before we're done today. So let's get into it. So here is, again, the basic formula for a thesis. And we talked about cookie cutter last week and about whether or not you can do well with a cookie cutter. But I think better that you have the cookie in the shape of a cookie, or a thesis in the shape of a thesis, than not. So I'm in and out on my own computer. I hope that that's not for everyone. But better that you have all these pieces, even if they're a little clunky, then you don't have the pieces at all. So I think one of the great things about this new rubric is that it breaks that down. You get a whole point just for having a thesis. So you just want to have a sentence and a half, a sentence or two that are clearly your claim. So again, this is just a basic formula just to make sure you get everything in there. I'm not a fan of the list thesis. This is true because ABC. And so I'm always trying to figure out how to even have a template that doesn't necessarily do that. I also know that there's there's often a question about how many paragraphs you should have. I think that regardless of the exam this year or always, that you really should not feel tied to a three-body paragraph essay, but that you should be thinking about how to most effectively support your thesis. So for that reason, there are only 2 devices in my thesis because I don't want you to think about device, and I'll get back to that later tonight. So in poem, authors, adjective, and element. And again, last week I was saying that if you can establish what the element does with an adjective, then it shows that you are ready to interpret the poem, as opposed to parroting, something that you've read before, or just trying to parrot the prompt or mimic the prompt. So you're going to show how these 2 elements or devices portray the prompt element as blank, yet blank, blank, but blank. And again, that's the complexity. So yeah, so Julia, I think in this way, it feels a little bit listy, but I think instead of saying the author portrays a relationship through metaphor, simile, and personification, it tries to, this template, it's still a template, it's still a cookie cutter, but tries to flip that. I think that's always been my first step to say to students. If you have a thesis that reads, the author shows a complex relationship using metaphor, simile, and personification, even if you just flip it, the author's metaphor, simile, and personification convey the relationship as blank, then you're already pushing up your sophistication level. So I think to some extent you're going to have a list, whether you have 2 or 3 elements, because you're always going to want to get those into the sentence. So I guess that, there's always going to be a projection of elements, but we're just trying to. So Natalie, that's a great question. Can we still get a perfect score if the thesis is not sophisticated? The great thing about the thesis point is that sophistication is completely separate. So you may be a sophisticated writer, you may have an excellent thesis, you may just have a way with words that establishes it, and that list or non-list comes to you very smoothly. But the thesis point comes just for having a defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. So as long as you have those pieces, and so just to be clear, in this thesis on the screen, the last part after portrays the prompt element as blank yet blank, that establishes a line of reasoning. Whatever I put in there, whatever complexity I've established, that establishes my line of reasoning, and it makes the rest of my claim. So you could have a thesis that doesn't even have devices in it, I guess, to go back to the list question. But I just think it's more clear for a reader that that's the way that you're interpreting it. But as long as you have filled in the blanks that are implied by the prompt, you're doing great. So can you get a perfect score if your thesis is not sophisticated? Absolutely, because you're going to get that thesis point for a thesis that does what a thesis is supposed to do. What are the most common elements found in a poem? Here's something that I think, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but here's something I think that we forget, and that is that figurative language is mostly comparisons, references, or contrasts, like metaphors, similes, comparisons, allusions, hyperboles, even references. And then we have the other side. We have contrast would be paradox, oxymoron. So those kind of things, it doesn't matter what you call them. What matters is that you see that the author or poet is making those comparisons, making those references, making those contrasts. So you could have an excellent, sophisticated, perfectly scoring essay without using a single literary device term, because you have instead interpreted the choices that the author makes. And I think that's what we forget a lot when we start to think about elements and devices, but that a poem, a poet especially, but anything that they're going to give you on the AP exam this year or any year, any text that they're going to give you is going to be full of choices that an author has made, because it's going to be of merit. It's going to be an excellent example of literature. So all of those things are going to be, I mean, any combination of those things are going to be found. So when we talk about what are the most common elements, we're going to have figurative comparisons. We're going to have diction choices. We're going to have, that's a little redundant, but we're going to have some sort of diction. We're going to have contrasts. We're going to have complexity. We're going to maybe have some structure that we can talk about. So any poem that you find on an AP Lit exam is going to have some element of those. And so whether or not you know what to call them is less important as whether or not you know what they're doing. I think that ambiguity is probably a little broad, because I think that in great literature, there's often ambiguity. There's almost always ambiguity. And so I think even if you just focus that and make sure that you've established in your thesis what the speaker is ambiguous about, or either what the speaker is ambiguous about or the ambiguity that the poet creates, I think you're getting better, you're getting stronger. I don't think that it's not an element. I just think it's usually an element. It's kind of like saying that a theme is a literary element. Well, they all have them, So I think ambiguity is as common as plot as opposed to as specific as personification. Okay, so this is yes, thank you, Jessica. The literary elements lend to the ambiguity. Absolutely, absolutely. And so again, that's an author choice, but it's something that's created. And I think probably, usually what you're calling ambiguity might also be able to be called complexity, which is what they're asking you. So it's kind of like telling them what they've asked you, We'll see. So here's the prompt that we're working with. In the following poem by Khalil Gibran, the speaker reflects on the consequences of defeat. Read the poem carefully. Then in a well-written essay, analyze how Gibran uses poetic elements and techniques to portray his complex relationship with defeat. So for those of you who weren't here last week, I wish I could call on somebody to read this poem, but I can't. So I guess it'll be me. I can bring somebody on the screen, but I won't put anybody on the spot that way. But here's the poem. Defeat, my solitude and my aloofness, you are dearer to me than 1,000 triumphs, and sweeter to my heart than all world glory. Defeat, my self-knowledge and my defiance. Through you I know that I am yet young and swift of foot, and not to be trapped by withering laurels. And in you I have found aloneness and the joy of being shunned and scorned. Defeat, my shining sword and shield. In your eyes I have read that to be enthroned is to be enslaved, and to be understood is to be leveled down, and to be grasped is but to reach one's fullness, and like a ripe fruit to fall and be consumed. Defeat, my bold companion. You shall hear my songs and my cries and my silences, and none but you shall speak to me of the beating of wings and urging of seas, and of mountains that burn in the night, and you alone shall climb my steep and rocky soul. Defeat, my deathless courage. You and I shall laugh together with the storm, And together we shall dig graves for all that die in us. And we shall stand in the sun with a will, and we shall be dangerous. So, going back quickly to the thesis, we know that to fill in half the blanks, right? We know we now know the poem, we now know the author, and we know what we're looking for. So your thesis could read, right? In the poem, and this is no frosting, right? In the poem, Khalil Gibran's Blank and Blank portrays the speaker's relationship with defeat as blank yet blank. So if you want to, I would say, the great artists, they learn somebody else's style before they find their own. So if you want to play with that, if you want to use that as a foundation, if you want to use that as a sentence, we can do that. Any of those things will be acceptable. So to remind those of you who were here before, this is what we came up with in terms of some devices, but also some kind of thematic and relationship points. Someone said that defeat is painful yet necessary. Anna said that the speaker treats defeat as a companion that teaches him the various ups and downs to life. Honor Julia said that his relationship with defeat is like a mentor. Sandra said that defeat helps us learn, but sometimes hurts, right? So that's kind of a lesson, but also a relationship, right? A teacher, yet villain, enemy. Santiago said that he's also stating some advantages of defeat by giving some negative traits about victory, right? So that's kind of the paradox of it. So that's a great catch, because that's not only the interpretation, that's also some literary device in there, because that's the flip, right? That defeat has advantages and victory has negativity, brings negativity. Together, Sandra, also, we were talking about where do we see that relationship, that they laughed together in the storm. And Martha said that that the deathless courage was a piece of evidence in the relationship with defeat. We also, Tigges. So Tigges pointed out the list, right? And Anisha called that anaphora. So those are kind of two ways that we talk about repetition, which is definitely something that we see here. And then the idea that getting used to defeat is admitting to it. And so then we're starting to push into the relationship, remembering that the relationship is what we're analyzing. So we know that no matter how you phrase your thesis, we don't have to figure out what it is that we're analyzing, because we know that that's the relationship. So as we read the poem, we're looking for that relationship that the speaker has with defeat, and knowing that it's complex. So knowing that it's not just companionship that the speaker has with defeat, but that there's something else there. And even to think that the traditional relationship with defeat adds to the complexity of the companionship, right? Because traditionally we don't think of defeat being a friend. And so even to use that is going well. So if you are any of those people, or if you just like their ideas, jot that down, because I know you have paper or computer or a document ready, because you're going to write. We're going to get to that. What's going to happen? I swear, I promise. All right. Let me know if you need to go back to that at any point, but I'm going to push forward. Try not to touch my face. Okay, so now we're getting more and more focused, right? So we have this general prompt template. We have the cookie cutter. We've cut the cookie. We know how the cookie is shaped because we know what we're looking for and what we're analyzing. And so now we're going to fill it in. So this is just my thesis. You can't have it, but you can use it, right? Just to show you what it looks like to fill those things in, that adjective plus element idea. So I've decided that of all the devices that we talked about, of all the meanings that we talked about, that I'm going to use apostrophe, which, if you don't know, is the address of an inanimate or absent audience. And so that's defeat, right? Because defeat can't hear. That goes with personification. If personification was something that you're thinking, obviously, if you talk to defeat like a person, then you're going to talk about defeat like a person. So those things go together. I just decided to focus on apostrophe, and that the apostrophe is a reflection. So in the poem, Khalil Gibran's use of apostrophe as reflection and anaphoric repetition in his paradoxical discoveries portrays the speaker's relationship with defeat as companionable yet challenging. So it's a lot of big words. I don't know. I just ended up with a bunch of multisyllabic words, but it basically just says he's talking to defeat and thinking about defeat, thinking about what defeat has done for him and with him, and then repeats the same things in the beginning of his lines a lot. And so then also there's this idea of paradox in there when he's talking about enthroned to be enslaved, that idea. But I'm going to focus on just half of that because I'm only trying to get one paragraph tonight. And then I just had another, so that fits into the template pretty much, right? He uses this and this to show the relationship as this. And then I just played with it a little bit, flipped it around a little bit, just to show you how you can say the same thing in a different way. So Khalil Gibran's reflective apostrophe and usage in the epiphanies of the toughest love and teaches challenging lessons. So that fits not as neatly into the template, but it says the same thing. And so again, it's just playing with the words, making, playing with the syntax. I think that's how you do it. And I do think that playing around with one sentence is a good exercise. Just how else could I say these words? Like, how else would they work? So you're going to write a thesis in a moment. I just wanted to really quickly talk about introduction, and I would like to make a very strong disclaimer. So on an average exam year, you have approximately 40 minutes to write an essay. You have 40 minutes to read a poem, analyze that poem, interpret that poem, and write an essay showing you, making a claim and supporting it. And so I want to say that if you don't have an introduction, if you have a thesis, and then you start a new paragraph supporting that thesis, you are doing well. I just want to say that, but I know that you might be in 12th grade, and so you've had almost a dozen years of learning how to write essays, and very rarely did any of your English teachers say you don't need an introduction. So I know it's hard to make that adjustment. I just want to put that out there that you don't have to have an introduction, but if you do want an introduction, and sometimes it helps to like write yourself into a thesis, that pretty much this is my equation. So that starts a parentheses that doesn't end. So I'm sorry about that. But so give some context. In this case, you would maybe write about experiencing defeat can be a lesson, that kind of thing. It's going to be pretty cliche probably because one, you are in a rush, and two, you're just trying to push yourself into, you're trying to just intro. I mean, that's what it is, right? It doesn't have to be, your literature. So, so get a little context about the poem, around the element that you are analyzing, right? Because you've been given something. So it would be about defeat, about one's relationship with defeat, about a traditional relationship with defeat, just a sentence-ish, right? About, the role of defeat in people's lives, and then a summary of the poem. So one thing that does help, if you have a summary in your introduction, that's, in this poem, Khalil Gibran's speaker examines his relationship with defeat and what he's learned through this relationship with defeat, and also reflects on where he'd like to go with defeat, right? Summarizing, not paraphrasing. You're not trying to get all the ideas, but one thing that helps do is prevents you from doing it later. So to have a summary in your introduction sometimes helps prevent you from writing too much summary in your analysis. So 3-ish sentences that basically do that, right? So you have having trouble making a triangle, but you basically have an inverted triangle because you're starting with this big idea about defeat. Then you are summarizing what the author has said about defeat, and then you're analyzing what that says about defeat, what that means about defeat. So you've got, you're focusing. So again, I'm just going to leave that there. Think about whether or not you need an introduction. But I do know, again, sometimes it helps to get the ball rolling, to just have that. Do you need a conclusion? So technically, no. Again, I mean, I think we know how essays work, right? We want to have them, but I think that a conclusion is going to place the poem in a broader context. It's going to push into theme. And so you could have a conclusion. It helps you wrap everything up just the same way that an introduction is going to help you push the ball rolling. So it's going to, you get to the bottom of the no. So I'm sorry. So I'm answering questions without saying the questions, but you don't have to have a conclusion. I would say that a thesis serves as an introduction. So a rewording, a rephrasing of that same idea could serve as a conclusion. So I always say that any essay, an AP exam or otherwise, any essay up to like a dissertation even is like a court case. You have an opening statement, which is going to be your introduction or just your thesis, and it establishes what it is that you're going to defend. It's like, this person is guilty or innocent because we have people to tell about it. And then your witnesses come, and your paragraph, your body paragraphs are your witnesses. They explain that they support that line of reasoning, right? They're your witnesses to say, here we know, and here we see, and this metaphor shows this relationship, and this simile shows this relationship, and the fact that he would personify defeat shows this relationship. And so then at the end, you do have a closing statement, but your closing statement is going to reflect, not echo, but it's going to reflect your opening statement. So to be clear, I'm not saying that you don't need an introduction or conclusion. I'm saying that they are closer to the bone of the thesis than you have been necessarily taught. Now, does each paragraph need to have 5 or more sentences? Yes. I would say that your paragraphs you should push for like 8. So that's another reason to make your introduction or your conclusion short, because you have a lot of writing to do. You have a lot to get in there. So let's look at that. So if we go back to the poem, looking at those devices that I found. So this would be like my annotation, right? I don't have a highlighter, but I also, didn't want to get in the way. So it's better to have lots of sentences and not 5 paragraphs. I would say yes, Olivia. I would say that's a really good way to think about it. You want your evidence and commentary to be very robust. And so if writing a lengthy introduction or a lengthy conclusion takes away from your time to write a robust body paragraph, then yes, you would rather have robust body paragraphs, because the evidence and commentary is 4 points out of 6. Right? So you're not getting evidence and commentary points in your introduction, and probably not in your conclusion. So you definitely want to focus on getting your points made, getting out that evidence and that commentary. Do I think it's necessary to provide at least 2 pieces of evidence per paragraph? Yes, I do. Yes, Natalie, that's a great question. I think that that's a pretty good rule. You're going to have 2-ish, and even in those 2 pieces, you might have multiple points. I think I'm going to make that a little more clear in a moment. So if I'm looking at this, poem, I've highlighted green is apostrophe when he talks to defeat, calls defeat my something, or talks to you at defeat as you, in your eyes. Again, that's leaning on personification, but I've decided to call it apostrophe. And then the blue is repetition, usually anaphora. To be enthroned, to be understood, to be grasped, that's anaphora. The opposite of anaphora, if you're interested, is epistrophe, E-P-I-S-T-R-O-P-H-E. And that means that you repeat the same thing at the end of your phrase. See, we don't need these words. We really don't. I like to say them, but we really don't need them. So the green is apostrophe, the blue is anaphora, and then that red are my paradoxes. And so again, when I wrote my thesis, just for the purposes of tonight, like I highlighted those pieces so that they would go together. Okay. So it's your turn. So you're going to need a thesis in order to support that thesis. Today's stream is supposed to be evidence and commentary. We're halfway through. We've talked a little bit about evidence, but we're going to push. We're going to push to get that done. So you need a thesis. I'm going to leave the poem up instead of leaving the thesis template up, because I think that's more useful to be able to name things and look again at what you see. Can you repeat the same quote for 2 different body paragraphs? I would suggest that you don't. I think that's a great question. I think will they deduct points if you repeat the quote? No, not necessarily, but I think that it weakens your commentary. I think so. I guess it depends on why you would want to, because I think that when you're organizing your essay, your quote is probably not going to do 2 different things. So I don't know, the 2 of you who asked that question, I don't know if you were thinking of this poem in particular or just thinking in general, but I don't know. For example, if you're talking about a complex relationship, one metaphor is probably not going to show both sides of that relationship, you know? And I think also it goes in the direction of making sure that your evidence is significant. I mean, yes, Martha, you could have different commentary for one quote. I think it will come down to what you're doing, but I would say if you can find another piece of evidence, then find another piece of evidence. Because also, we're really looking for patterns, right? So to see one thing that's said twice is not necessarily repetition. You know what I mean? So I think the more evidence you can find for each idea, the stronger your commentary. And so if you have a metaphor, for example, again, I don't know that you would want to, I think it would weaken your both interpretations if you interpret it as meaning 2 different things. I feel like that would be very dependent on the actual text, but I don't think that you should try. I guess that's not my strongest answer ever I've given in life, but I can't imagine how it would work, I guess. If any of you who asked about that, if you see that you would use something in this poem more than once to mean more than one thing, then definitely kind of throw that out so that I could more specifically answer the question. Okay. So for your thesis, you're going to try to establish everything that you would talk about, right? So we're going to write this thesis like you were writing a whole essay, but we're not going to write a whole essay. But it's going to be important that you have your entire claim in your thesis in order to make choices later. So put your thesis in the chat. Be vulnerable, be brave, be willing. See if we can get the timer to go. Why can't we get the timer to go? Oh well, 5 minutes. It doesn't matter. We weren't going to look at the timer anyway. Going to put the poem back. You should have 2-ish devices, and you should be establishing what the complexity is of the relationship. 5 minutes. Thanks. Yes. Exactly. One minute. Okay. So that's 5 minutes. If you are working, don't feel like you should not still put your thesis in the chat. So we've got some great work here. So again, the thesis point comes for a defensible claim, right? So you need to make sure that you have what the relationship is, and an interpretation of the poem. And technically, devices make that, right? Because the prompt is about how the author conveys it. So we put those in there. So just making sure what's going to earn that point is your establishment of, sorry, the music was still going. I was talking so loud and I was like, why? The thesis point is going to come from you establishing this is the relationship, right? So if you have some kind of phrasing that talks about this is the relationship that is shown, then you are getting that point. So just some rock stars. Everybody's a rock star. So in the poem Defeat, Khalil Gibran uses repetition and personification. We've got elements there to convey the idea that he speaks from experience, and that defeat can be empowering and something to learn from, right? Some complexity there. That's two sides of defeat, that it is empowering and something to learn from. The poet demonstrates the character's acknowledgments of the benefits of defeat and the disadvantages of victory, right? Complexity through the use of repetition and imagery. In the poem Defeat, the use of personification and paradox, again, elements here, allows the reader to portray defeat as something good rather than something bad. I think that it's not really clear what the sides are, because I think because there is no necessarily defeat is bad in this poem, it makes it unclear how you're going to address those two sides. So that's just something to think about. Anaphors in second person to demonstrate a loving yet difficult relationship, right? Complexity between the narrator and his lover. So I'm just curious, Rebecca, is your line of reasoning, is your claim that this is not really to defeat at all, or that defeat is like a lover? I'm just curious because it's a strong thesis either way. I'm just wondering what you're thinking. Exceptional repetition and detailed figurative language portrays the complexity of perseverance, which shows how tired the character is. Absolutely, right? The speaker. So it's tiring to be defeated all the time. And so that would be really that would interest me, because I'd be really interested in what you interpreted as tired. So that's awesome, Olivia. I will say the thing about adjectives, right, is that, one of the things that my students always say is vivid imagery. And they love vivid imagery and specific diction. And I always cringe because imagery is vivid. That's how we know it's imagery. You know what I mean? It stands out to you and you're like, oh, I can really see that, smell that, hear that. So be careful about adjectives that don't establish interpretation. That's what I mean. The author portrays this familiar yet uncertain relationship with defeat by treating it as an individual person using metaphors. Good. Repetition and personification to portray the author's defeat as a lesson that can be devastating yet very helpful, right? Because it's a lesson that can be learned. These are so exciting. I'm so excited. I love this. Author effectively conveys the complexity of the relationship with defeat through the use of metaphor and diction. So Natalie, I would push you to include in there what that complexity is, because the prompt says that the relationship is complex, right? So we all know that. So what the reader wants to see is that you know what's complex about that relationship. Portrays the speaker's relationship with defeat as familiar yet influential. Great. Complexity of the feelings. Again, what is that complexity? I would ask. Demonstrates how the speaker sees defeat as both good and bad. Yes. Okay. Awesome. Rebecca, I think that's so cool that defeat is like a lover. And I think that plays out. I think you can definitely find evidence for that. So I wanted to come back to Martha asked kind of a more specific question about quotes and commentary about repeating. And so the question is, what if you only find one quote and decide to divide the quote into two parts with two different commentary? Would this be considered wrong? And I think that in that case, it would be more than one quote. You know, so if you only use half of a line, say, for one thing, but the other half for another thing, then it's not one quote anymore, even though it came from one line. So for example, through you, I know that I am yet young and swift of foot, right? I could use through you, I know as apostrophe, and yet young and swift of foot as a metaphor or some imagery around like defeat keeping him young, about the lessons that he's learning. So one half of that is the companionship of defeat, and the other half of that is the lessons that you learn from defeat. And so in that case, you have used one line, but you've used it in two different ways. And so if that's kind of what if that's kind of what you guys were thinking about with using a quote twice, then absolutely. Like if you break it up, it's two quotes. I'm saying that I would not say through, for example, in the third stanza, to be enthroned is to be enslaved, to be understood is to be leveled down, you know, those. I wouldn't use those as anaphora and then use them again as paradox. right? I would make that decision because there's another example of anaphora, but there's not another example of paradox. I think that helps answer the question better. Is there such a thing as relationship being described too basically, like it's good yet bad? So again, yes, I think good and bad, let's throw those away, right? It's kind of like, yes. Okay, so sorry. It's good yet bad. I think that what you really want to push yourself to say what good and bad is that positive yet negative? Is it friendly yet, enemy? Is it hero yet villain? Like, what does it mean to be good or bad in this case? So that's a really good question, Anna. I do think that's something that's not even sophistication, but about the claim that you're making. Because if you use words like good and bad, it's not specific enough to say that you understand. And so you definitely want to use every opportunity that you have to show how well you understand the poem and the relationship in the poem. Okay, so was it okay that if you used only 2 literary terms? Absolutely, because you might only have 2 body paragraphs, and that would be fine. Absolutely fine. Okay, so thank you, all of you. I'm so excited about those theses, and I'm so excited about the next step, which is to actually get to evidence and commentary. But first, and so I talked about this a little bit earlier, but just a word about words. So 3 things that I would like to introduce or remind, and that's about choosing the right literary devices and saying the right thing about the literary devices. And I said earlier about the adjectives, making sure that the adjectives imply interpretation. Also making sure that you've selected devices that actually support your thesis as opposed to just the devices that you saw. And again, that's something that you're looking for, devices that make a pattern, not just devices that you see, right? Like imagery might be great, but it might not mean anything in terms of what you're being asked to analyze on this exam. So diction is word choice. That's what it means. And we all choose words. Right? Right now, as I'm talking, I'm deciding what words I'm going to use. Sometimes I do that smoothly, and sometimes I have them prepared, and sometimes I don't, right? But we're all choosing words to convey our thoughts. And so if you write that the poet uses diction, then you're just saying that the poet wrote. And that doesn't imply that you have actually interpreted this poem and you understand the choices that were made. So you think to yourself, the author says blank when he could have said blank, implying that blank. So whatever goes into that last blank is where your interpretation, I didn't get in the screen, but whatever goes in that last blank is implying that your interpretation. That's what's going to support your claim. So if I use roar when I could have said yawn, right? My friend roared as he woke up from his long nap. Like that means that the yawn was very full. It was loud. It was leonine, right? And so that has a different connotation. And so that implies that either he was very tired or very excited to be awake, or that he's like a lion, right? So any of those things, like I'm calling him a beast because he was so big, it was ridiculous. Right? And so you're thinking about what are the connotations. And so when you're thinking about diction, like if I was going to use that choice, then I would say like animalistic or beast-like diction, right? Or diction that implies that the friend is primal, right? So think about what it is that you've decided, like what did you notice about those words? And that helps you with the choice. Metaphors and similes are comparisons, like I said earlier. So what does it connote to compare defeat to a sword and shield in the line where he did? Like he could have said something else. How would it be different to compare it to a gun? They're both weapons, but why would he choose a sword and a shield in a time where guns existed? How would it be different if he compared defeat to a pin? How would it be different if he compared defeat to a glass of water, right? Defeat is refreshing. It makes you, rejuvenates you for the next mission, right? So what is being implied by the comparison helps you decide what the adjective is to use on those metaphors, but also what it is that you're saying. And then the last thing is that repetition means emphasis. And these might be, I'm sure these are things that you've heard before, but I just want to remind you as you're making choices, always, like when you're interpreting, when you're analyzing something, And anaphora it's a pretty word, but also it creates rhythm, right? To be enslaved, to be understood, to be, right? It helps you, and so then you're thinking, okay, what's being emphasized there? So it's not going to be enough to say he repeats to be to emphasize what he's like. You know what I mean? You want to think about not only the emphasis, the repetition of those words, but the repetition of the words after, and what idea they all make together. Okay. Okay. Do we base the other paragraphs on just explaining the literary terms that we have? So you are using those paragraphs to support your idea, to support your line of reasoning. And your line of reasoning is about the structural element. So you have some choices about what those paragraphs do. And I'm going to say that these three options are all available to you, but that each one is stronger in analysis. So obviously you can organize your essay by device. If you have what I have, apostrophe and anaphora, you could have a paragraph about apostrophe and a paragraph about anaphora. You could organize your essay by the text, the way the text is organized. So you would write about what ideas and devices are in stanzas 1 and 2, what idea or devices in stanza 3, what idea or devices in stanza 4 and 5. I would say that that's usually stronger for a piece of prose than it is for a poem. I would also say that if you have really strong shifts in a poem, if you see that a poem changes in time, like a person is flashing back on their childhood and then they bring it to the present, or if you see that a poem is shifting in tone or even in speaker maybe. So that would be a way that you might think about organizing the text organizing your essay the way that the text is organized, because then you could talk about those chunks more clearly about what's going on in them. I think that one of the strongest ways, though, is to organize it by complexity. So if my thesis says that his relationship with defeat is one of companionship, but also challenge, then I have a paragraph about companionship and a paragraph about challenge. You might have more complexity than that, so you might have more paragraphs. But what it does is, instead of saying, oh, these are the two ways that he uses anaphora, this is how he uses anaphora to show the companionship, and this is how he uses anaphora to talk about challenge. And I think by organizing it that way, not only have you very clearly shown the complexity, that you understand the complexity, but you've also used multiple, you've shown how an author doesn't make device choices for the sake of devices. Like, he doesn't use metaphors because metaphors are nice. He uses metaphors to show this idea, but also this idea. And I think that you might find, going back to that idea about repeating quotes, you might find that your devices fall into one side of the complexity or another. And so then should you add another paragraph that ties it together? I think that your thesis ties it together. And so really what you're thinking, not about the relationship between the paragraphs necessarily, but the relationship between each body paragraph and the thesis. And so could your conclusion tie it together? Absolutely. But it doesn't have to be long. So again, your conclusion is your closing statement. So your conclusion adds your conclusion is like, see what I did here? See what I showed you? I said I was going to show you what the relationship is, and this is what I used to show you that relationship. And so my conclusion just shows you what I showed you. And that sounds redundant, but I think it's all a conclusion does, is puts a bow on it and makes it pretty, makes it clear. This is what I said. How can you explain a complex relationship without saying that it's complex? You show what the sides are. I think complex is just another word for conflict. That's another word for tension. It's another word for facets, right? So as long as you say what they are, and that's why the thesis has a conjunction in it. That's why the thesis has a conjunction in it. So you say that it's companionable yet challenging, that it's loving yet difficult. And so that's how you explain the complex relationship. Okay, so we're running out of time. This is how you get to, yes, I just said that. So that's how I would show, so that's how I would put my devices, into those ideas. So I've decided that he uses apostrophe and anaphora to show the companionship, and he uses anaphora and paradox to show the challenge. So this is how you get to 8 sentences. I don't really use this as an acronym because ACAX doesn't make any sense, but I do try to get students to memorize assertion, evidence, commentary, summation, because every paragraph is a little essay. It's a baby essay. So your assertion is like a baby thesis. It's like the thesis for this section. And then you have another thesis for the other section. So I would have an assertion, to go back, I would have an assertion about the companionship with defeat, how the anaphora and apostrophe show the companionship with defeat, and then another assertion about how the anaphora and paradox show the relationship to be a challenge. I'm talking really fast because it's 8:55. Okay, so again, thinking and analyze how the speaker in the poem. Oh, sorry. This is an example, and I'm not going to read this paragraph. I just want to show you how it kind of plays out, and also the kind of length of each of these pieces, because they're not equal. Like, all of these pieces are not equal in a paragraph. So this, last week I showed you the theses about the juggler, and this is a paragraph about the juggler. Again, it doesn't matter that you haven't read the juggler. I just want to show you, first of all, how long this paragraph is, because it's a big one. It's a beast of a paragraph, but it also earned a 9. So, so the assertion is that the speaker's, yes, exactly. The assertion is that the speaker's view of the world as seen through the lens of their observation of the juggler is also observable within the various diction choices made through the poem. So that's a long way of saying that the speaker's view of the world is shown by the author's diction. So this person is, wordy, which is fine. It's great. He uses words beautifully. I don't know why I call him a he. I usually call high scorers a she, but it's just my way of balancing patriarchy. But this is half of the thesis. So the thesis had more than diction in it. So this paragraph is just going to be about diction. And the prompt was how the speaker in the poem describe, I'm sorry, that is a typo. How the author describes the speaker and what that description, I'm sorry, I'm getting really twisting myself up here. How the speaker describes the juggler and what that description reveals about the speaker. So that's 2 things that need to happen in every paragraph. We need to know how the speaker describes the juggler and also what that reveals about the speaker. And so that helps to create that kind of balance of evidence and commentary. But the evidence is in the bright blue and the commentary is in the purples. And there are 2 purples because one of the purples is about the description of the speaker, and the other purple is about what that description says about the speaker, description of the juggler and what that description says about the speaker. So this is a humongous paragraph, but that's what this writer needed to do the job. And so you, again, like going back to that idea about introductions and conclusions, for some of us who don't write as quickly, or maybe haven't thought as quickly, or maybe didn't read as quickly, right? We need to figure out how to use our time. And I want you to spend the bulk of your writing time, however much time that ends up being for you, like spend the bulk of your writing time making these robust paragraphs, because again, evidence and commentary is the bulk of your score. So so the top is my thesis, same thesis that I had before. And I've decided that I'm going to divide it by complexity. I'm going to organize my essay by complexity. So I have 1 paragraph on one side and 1 paragraph on the other. And again, the fewer paragraphs you plan to have, the longer those paragraphs can be, right? Because you're not thinking, oh, I need another paragraph, right? So again, making sure that each paragraph connects to your thesis, as opposed to like, I still need to wrap these 2 together. So I would take basically half of my thesis. And so that makes my assertion. Throughout the poem, Gibran's repetition and apostrophic address of defeat reveal the trusted alliance of the speaker's relationship with the defeat. So it shows that they're allies, they're friends, they're companions. And so my evidence, I have 3 sets of evidence. Defeat my defeat, because that's repeated at the beginning of every stanza. And so I don't have to write it 5 times, right? But just at the beginning, I would say at the beginning of every stanza, the author repeats defeat my defeat, addressing defeat not only as a friend, but as my defeat, right? It implies some, not only companionship, but not ownership, but like we belong to each other, right? Defeat, you are a friend of mine. You are, of my heart. And then also talking to defeat as a person. Through you, I know, addressing them. Somebody said second person, right? And I'm still calling it apostrophe, but of course you could call it second person. Through you, I know. In you, I have found. And so that starts to talk about the ways that defeat has helped, right? Somebody said mentor, same idea, right? That defeat supplies this speaker with opportunities to learn and see things. In your eyes, I have read. Defeat doesn't have eyes, right? But personifying and addressing defeat as a friend. And then this idea that happened in the second half of the poem, I think maybe the 4th stanza, you shall hear, none but you shall speak, you alone shall climb. And so it goes to, I think that was Rebecca's idea about the lover, right? That there are certain things that only defeat can see or speak or understand or be able to experience with the poet, with the speaker. So I hope that gave you something to think about, not only continuing in the thesis introduction piece, but also organizing your essay, how to select evidence, because I think when you select it most clearly, then your commentary rolls out a lot more smoothly, because you know why you chose that metaphor, as opposed to you chose it because it was a metaphor. So I won't give you homework of writing a paragraph, but I definitely think that it would be something to think about. And you know what I will do? Here's what I'll do, because some of you I've seen respond to that practice prompt. So what I'm going to do is just make this a practice prompt. And so you can use your same thesis and then just write a paragraph to go with that thesis that kind of takes out half of it and has an assertion and then support. And so you want to do this first, just figure out what your assertion is and what the evidence is that supports that, and then put commentary in between to make a paragraph. So feel free to respond to that practice prompt, and I will give you feedback if you want it, or just, an opportunity to practice. If anybody purchased a cram pass, then I'll see you on Thursday. You just can't get enough of me. And so you might want to choose between, you get the paid version if you paid for it. But Laura and I will continue to give the free live streams. So thank you again for a fantastic stream. It's so great to come and see you all every Monday night. Have a great week. Go to the practice prompt. I'll put that up tonight or tomorrow if you're interested in fleshing this out into a paragraph. Good night, all. Thanks, Jessica. You all have a great week. And at the end of this week, we'll have an idea about the exam. So next time I see you, we can talk about that.